We're going to show an integration example of Appscan, our IPSs, XGS IPS, as well as QRadar, of course. In this particular demo environment, what we have is we fed the information from the configuration of our IPS, our firewalls, our routers. We fed all that into QRM. And what that allows QRadar to be aware of with all that configuration information, this is actually read-only info, is to actually be completely aware of the topology. In fact, you can actually display the topology of the network, and you can print it, put it in Visio, and all that good stuff, and use it for many other things. But we'll see in this particular case how that topology information is actually exploited. Now, we also have in this environment a web application that was scanned with Appscan. And Appscan found, among other things, SQL injection vulnerabilities on that web application. Using the publish button in Appscan Enterprise, we actually feed that information into QRadar's QVM, Vulnerability Manager. So we publish that information so QRadar is aware of those vulnerabilities. Very good. Now, what we have is a bad actor coming from this source IP. He's coming from the internet and he's going into this portal, and he's actually going and exploring to see whether this particular field of this web application has vulnerabilities to SQL injection. So he's sending SQL injection command. This particular case is actually a SQL injection union select to that particular target application. Well, that fires an event on the XGS that is actually sent to QRadar, of course. Every time it sees SQL injection traffic, we have it set up to send an event information to QRadar. But every time that you get somebody sending SQL injection commands in any one of your fields, you're not gonna, wake anybody up. In other words, you're not gonna create an offense and to request people to act, because hackers do that all the time. However, in this particular case, the rule fires an offense because it obviously knows that that particular application has a SQL injection vulnerability, and I see an attempt of exploitation going right through it. So that fires an offense. What are the things that a user, a SOC operator, can actually do? Well, for once, he can just right-click on the offending source IP of the actual offense, and in this particular case, that particular IP address. When he right-clicks, you have the option of sending an alert that basically it's going to tell the IPS to quarantine anything that comes from that particular IP address. Well, that's good for dealing for that immediate attack, but the bad guys can use other IPs, so this is good for now, but what else can I do? Well, the other thing that the operator can do is that Vulnerability Manager in QRadar receives information when a vulnerability gets published. Actually, anyone gets that information about is part of the metadata of the vulnerability, very rich. One of the fields in that metadata has a section called Virtual Patch by Vendor. And in there, it lists the vendors that have virtual patches, meaning we have techniques within the IPS and ways of actually blocking these type of things. But what happened with this? Why isn't this being used more widely? Well, the problem number one is that the people that deals with this, never talk with the people that deals with Appscan or the actual SIEM per se. And and you don't deploy all the virtual patches that you have, because otherwise the performance of your IPS will go down to the floor. However, in this particular case, because Vulnerability Manager is aware of the topology, he got information on the topology, and he knows that this IPS is in front of that, is between the internet and that application, so it knows that if you turn that virtual patch on, you can actually block that attack. So it actually has the capability of notifying the Site Protector console, where you manage all the IPSs, and ask the actual administrator of the IPSs to deploy that particular virtual patch. Now you have dealt with that vulnerability in a more efficient way, and you have also bought time for your application developers to fix that and sanitize those input fields to prevent that type of attack.